I am a U.S. Army veteran who enlisted in 2009 and sustained traumatic brain injuries and spinal fractures from an airborne training operation at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I left active duty service in 2011, transitioning to the Maryland National Guard, and was honorably discharged in 2015. I have always been very active, running, doing martial arts, scuba diving. I was diagnosed with bone cancer in May of 2021. Much of my self-worth was derived from my physical abilities. To the extent of the cancer, my concerns about having my surgery at the VA Center, I was given a community care referral to Duke Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. In summer of 2021, my left leg was amputated above the knee in August of 2021 at Duke. After the surgery, I was in a wheelchair for 7 months. My first VA treatment appointment was on November 18th, 2021. VA claims they gave me a martial arts prosthetic within 28 days and a state-of-the-art leg system within 53 days of this appointment, but neither of those worked. I learned later that remaining in a wheelchair post-amputation for as long as I did can inhibit physical and mental recovery. I had no idea it would take the VA 2 years to get me a proper prosthetic. I would have to advocate aggressively for myself at every turn. Eventually seeking help from Representative Rouser, Senator Tillis, the Independence Fund, and this committee staff, my experience with the VA over those 2 years were bewildering and demoralizing. The staff at the local VA hospital consistently failed to communicate well about my care, follow-through, care coordination, and expedite requests for prosthetics. All of the community vendors who responded to the VA request to produce the proper fitting leg socket for me did their best, but some told me the acquisition process at VA was slow and sometimes they would not get paid promptly by the VA. This would only add to the stress of not being able to resume my normal activities outside of a wheelchair. In October of 2022, I heard about a special socket the VA had provided to another amputee, the Quatro Variable Volume Socket. Given my level of physical activity and the changes in blood flow and residual limb, I thought this system would be my answer. I asked the VA to obtain one, but they never followed through to acquire it. The request sat idle and eventually expired. I had to start all over again. I continued to work with a local vendor to obtain a properly fitting socket. During those months, I was using a prosthetic ankle. I visited the vendor for routine maintenance in September of 2022. The vendor told me they had to repossess it because the VA hadn't paid them. I left the vendor without the ankle and had to temporarily use an older ankle that was not flexible for the next year. VA continued to pursue the same types of sockets. I continued to tell the VA that I needed a different type of socket, basically the Quattro. This Groundhog Day process was extremely frustrating for me and my family. I was stuck in a wheelchair for 6 months and missed out on many personal activities. In October of 2023, I was so frustrated with VA Prosthetics after a socket they acquired from a vendor broke while I was overseas. I contacted Congressman Rouser's staff for help. They tried to get VA moving, but Congress was still slow. After 2 months of congressional inquiry, I reached out to the Independence Fund's casework team in Charlotte. Their team and Congressman Rouser's staff pressed VA for answers. In December of 2023, VA finally agreed to shift my prosthetics care to Richmond, Virginia. I was assigned to a VA prosthetics doctor there. He assessed my needs for a different type of socket so I could get out of the wheelchair and travel more easily for my business and participate in sporting activities with my wife and friends. The Richmond VA doctor worked with me and local vendor to get me an interim that fit well. But it wasn't until May of 2024 that VA finally purchased and delivered the Quattro socket I'm using here today. I have lost 34 pounds since getting the socket. I'm a new person today. This only happened because of continued pressure on VA from Congress and the Independence Fund. Looking forward, it's clear to me that VA needs a deep dive into what they address and process everyday amputees' needs for prosthetics, especially ones like mine, and deliver them timely. The entire experience can be overly bureaucratic, sluggish, often impersonal, and sometimes uncaring. I know VA has testified that the cost of these recreational limbs is a concern, but very honestly, these experts don't realize what it's like to be confined to a wheelchair, unable to swim or run, carry your child, and then ignore unseen costs, long delays like mine, like mental health anguish I went through, and the related cost VA paid for additional mental health visits I needed over these 2 years. The VA has also testified that all these services are already being provided, yet I and other amputees are proof that commitment is not being honored and followed by local VA staffs and supported by a responsive acquisition system. There are lifelong future cost savings for VA when veterans can obtain the prosthetics they need to live active, fulfilling lives. We are not looking for special treatment. We just want to live our lives as independently as possible. I appreciate the time you have given me today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for making the trip here to Washington, D.C. to share your story and your testimony with us.